how do you bring financial data to a meeting? Think about resource allocation reviews or just general school management, and actually not have people have a gut reaction of like, how are you putting money against my student outcomes? And so that's really where we started this. In addition to the 26 districts that we worked with over the 2-year pilot, we also conducted other focus groups and interviews with principals and school leaders and district leaders and school board members to really get a sense of how people absorb this information. So we've been using the tool now in trainings for the last couple of years as well. So I feel like we've got a lot of people who've helped us inform what these visualizations look like. So again, we just love the data, and we're glad to find a way to share it with people in a way that drives conversations that are productive. Again, want to make sure people know that I know, and one of the things that's been great about this is that these aren't the only context, right? Like, you can't just take spending and outcomes and say, ta-da, here's your recipe, go forward and do good. But there's a lot of context. And one of the most positive outcomes of the program and the pilot that we did was really learning that you could actually dive into the context of what's happening in a school setting with this data and get people to tease out what might be going on and some solutions that they have. So I'll walk through all that. But this is the sort of displays that we were out there and talking with district leaders about. But the school spending snapshot tool, when you get to it, this is what it looks like. And I'll describe very quickly. There are 4 tabs across the top, and the first tab just opens up automatically. That's the tool. That's where you're going to get the data. This questions to explore tab is a set of questions based on stakeholder, what you might want to ask when you look at the data, right? So we wanted to make sure we were helping people to inform their conversations, think about what they're seeing, but questions for their next steps, who they might want to talk to, what might they be looking for when they're looking at the data. So we help walk different stakeholders through that. And then frequently asked questions is just a place where we've started to compile the frequently asked questions. One that will come up regularly, my school's not on here, right? Well, particularly when we get in front of school leaders or parents, they're like, dig in immediately. They'll go zeroing in for one particular school. And that's great, but schools are missing. We've used the school spending data that's reported under the ESSA requirement. And in some states, the school wasn't reported for the spending, so they're not in this. Some schools don't have outcomes, so they're also not listed in here, but there is a file where you can see every school that we know is intentionally missing. There are other schools that they did report the data, but there's such an outlier, either a super low spend, so something wasn't reported in their spending data, or super high. And very often those might be alternative schools, but because what we wanted to do is bring people into the picture, if you have an extreme outlier, you can't see. So again, it's a technical issue, but the data are there in the underlying and the frequently asked questions. Then background just shows more background about the project. Again, here is the website link if you want to go to it while I'm even talking through it. That's fine by me. Explore and have fun. But the first display that comes up is just an array of spending. And so you could look at a district like this. I think that this is actually not this district in Maryland. I think it might be U46, but you can see here a couple of different things that are going on. So one is this color array is based on economic disadvantaged percentages of students in the school. So in the work with the U.S. Department of Ed, we were trying to narrow down what are the different student characteristics we wanted to account for. So right now the tool is only accounting for this percent economic disadvantage. We are looking into the future to be able to look at other categories of student characteristics, but for now we stuck on this. We also tested like a very immediate reaction. Some districts said, well, why are the schools that serve the students with the highest living in poverty percentages, so the higher percent of economic disadvantage, in red? We don't want them in red. Can you put them in green? But what was interesting, as soon as we flipped the colors, the people could not process the data. They couldn't find the schools we were trying to get them to identify. But I know that it's hard for some schools, some districts, some states to see this sort of color array. We've talked about the word equity, at least in our earlier breakout, that it's hard to talk about equity. So we do have down here in the corner, you can change to different color palettes. They'll tell you it's really hard to draw people's attention to the data we want them to see. We want them to be looking at these schools, the schools serving a higher need population that are getting less money than their peer schools. So if you look at this district, when you're looking across this spending array, looking at this, they have a school here that has relatively low poverty percentage and it's spending about $20,000 per student. And then you have some over here that have a much higher percentage of students and they're getting a little bit less money than this higher need school. There could be lots of reasons for that. And so what would happen is district leaders would look at this and they go, yeah, but, and they have some context. Sometimes they jump immediately to, oh, that school serves a high percentage of special education students. And that's possible, but it doesn't really generally account for most of the difference in the spending. There's also some other things that you can see when you're looking at this. You see this school here, so it's serving relatively a high percent of economically disadvantaged students. It has more money than some of the wealthier peers, but this dollar bucket right here, the lightly shaded, those are their federal funds. So if I'm looking at this school right now and I'm a district leader, I'm not sure that we're actually getting over supplement, not supplant. Right? Those federal dollars are supposed to be supplementing. So this is a look that most districts have not done of their schools. So again, it's not meant for blame, but it's like, let's just talk about it. Let's explore this. And what can we learn when we're looking at it? So is the higher spending due to smaller school size? That's also often what we would see. And so we can talk about that and how that rolls out in some of these other displays. But here's something that's interesting. After viewing the data, what if a school board member makes a motion to require the district's budget to include some investment intended to remedy this uneven spending between schools? What do you think? We shared this with school board members and they're like, I want to see this. I need to get this for my school, my school district. I want to be able to have this information in budgeting. I want to be able to think about this. Is this reasonable to look at it this way and to say, I want to remedy this spending? So the lowest performing elementary school for the prior year in this district was Harmony Hills. And oh, dang it, the animations are off. I apologize. Harmony Hills was one of these lower spending schools down here when we were looking at it. And so it was down here. But the prior year, it was the lowest performing school. And so it got less money than the previous year when its outcomes went down. These are the sorts of spending arrays and like looks that we're not making. So in this particular case, when we were having a conversation with the district, the chief academic officer said, we're purchasing new curriculum for all of our schools. That should help. And we're saying you've got a relatively high need school, it's not on here, who had less money going into this new year than the previous year and had lower outcomes. Let's talk about and let's get with that school and see what we can do to help that school. So after viewing this data, a school board member might say that I would like to require the district's budget to include some investment intended to remedy that school's outcomes, not everybody's. Like this curriculum should fix everybody's, but I want to fix this school's outcomes. This sort of data, again, focuses their attention and conversations in a very productive way. So this is the meat of what the next few displays will show. So we have one display here that will show spending on this axis and outcomes here. And again, what was used here for outcomes is the proficiency on the state exam. And that was also a very conscious decision going into this, that those are the data that are most familiar because they're on the report card. So we're going to stick with those. We do, during the pilot, we did some customization and changed this so that we could have other conversations around graduation rate, attendance. There's all sorts of outcomes measures. And so what do we want to put on that axis? But for now, the tool just has the state exam. But this view gives you a look across the school district on all of its schools. So again, we have the same color coding. So the higher need schools, the schools serving the students with the highest needs are there in red, and the lower needs are in green. So you can see, and school size is represented by the size of the circle. Very often, though, that's related to when you're looking across the whole district, right? The high schools are usually larger than the elementary schools. So you can filter just to look at like schools as well. So you'll have this view. And you can say something like outcomes up here are strong up here in this quadrant, right? Like they're getting really good results for their students up here. They've anywhere from this 80%, 60%. The school here is at 65% proficiency, but the district directs a larger share of its funds to the school than others in the district. It's true. They get a little bit more money, but they're getting good outcomes for those students. So going forward, are there trade-offs that we could make at the district level so that the higher spending doesn't come at the expense of the other schools, right? So you see some schools down here that have relatively low outcomes, but they're also spending a lot less. All of that money is in one pot, and the district made decisions to send more money to certain schools. So what are some things that we could do going forward? Up here, it's a small school. Could they bring in more students? Is that a possibility? If higher salaries are driving up the cost, can we consider using fewer supervisory staff? Or if it's more expensive because it gets the same staffing with fewer students, could we consider adding more students to the school? Or doing a different mix of staff, for sure. So these are the sorts of conversations we were having with the districts and that they were taking the data and using. This school gets fewer dollars than the district average and has low outcomes down here. Can you say that? It's interesting. A lot of people don't want to say it. You get really low outcomes. But in this conversation, they're not also getting their fair share of the resources. And so we're working with school districts who are using this in their management conversation with these school leaders. How do we ensure that this school is funded fairly? What sort of allocation adjustments could we make? Do we want to do something where we're bringing some additional resources there? Do we want to do a weighted formula across our whole district? Like, what is it that we want to do to help remedy that? And then if the lower costs are due to predominantly junior staff, is there a way we could free up additional dollars to offset those salaries? Is there a way that we could move money to this school to support that junior staff? Maybe they have more staffing, more positions. Maybe they end up with some sort of senior staff member that is a teacher leader, those sorts of things. Often also what we would hear down here, interestingly enough, from school leaders is say, you know what, I go all year with unfilled positions. People don't want to teach in my school. I'm struggling to get these positions filled. So then I have substitute teachers filling in. It's no wonder my student outcomes can't possibly be the same as the others. Could you? And this was a novel idea. And one of the districts said, you know what, I believe this. And this principle is amazing. Could you post my position first and not all these other schools up here until mine's filled? And the district leader's like, that is a great idea. Let's start by opening up those positions first and getting those filled before we move on to the others. So these are the sorts of conversations that were coming out of bringing data to the conversation. Any questions about what I've shared so far?
I see some questions in the chat, Laura, and I don't know if anyone just wants to come off mute to ask questions.
That would be great, Carol, if people just want to come off mute.
So to be clear, the number for spending per student, is that the district or the school? How is that number derived?
So that is the dollar amount that was reported by the district to the state and on the report cards per the ESSA financial transparency requirement to report school by school spending. So that varies a little bit state by state because there wasn't a consistent guidance. States were allowed to make their own decisions around what districts would include. But in general, that it has to, by law, account for actual teacher salaries at those schools. So labor's 80 to 90% of the spending. So it does account for actual teacher salaries. But some districts, how they parsed out transportation or food had some variance, but those are the dollar amounts that are coming off the report cards that were published. And we started with FY19 data. We are adding some states right now, and we have FY21 and 22 for, I think, half the states, and we're updating those right now. Does that help?
And then that number is divided by the number of students in the school to get the per pupil spending?
Yes.
Okay.
And different states did it differently. And Oregon had, I think they I don't remember, but I think that they did a count day. So I don't remember exactly, but we can get you. It's whatever's on the report card. That is the dollar amount we're using.
Yeah, I've not seen this data before, and it's fascinating, but also would have to be used really carefully and in context. Prior to my position currently, I was superintendent of a single school district. And I just went and looked at that number, and it looks extraordinarily high. And I'd be thinking, if I didn't have any context, I'd be thinking, boy, they should be having huge academic success. But because it was a district with only 200 kids, and so much of the money had to go to the infrastructure of busing and building and facilities and transportation, child nutrition, all that stuff. That amount is really artificially inflated compared to, I left from Virginia to move to Oregon, and I looked at the school I was in Virginia, and the Oregon school looks like it's funding at twice the amount per pupil, but not all of that money gets to the student level. So it's amazing data. I am so happy to have this resource. And then I just also caution that it has to be used in context.
Definitely. And I will say that we did a lot of testing around even adding these little labels up here to help people understand what they're seeing and to translate it. So yes, definitely. Was there another comment question?
Hey, Laura, this is Jerry again in Illinois, and I know we have to get to the other slides, so I'll make it brief. My question, on the questions tab, are those questions static, or can they be modified in order to specifically meet the needs of the individual districts? Or how does one go about seeing if we can tailor it for our needs?
Yeah, so they are static on our site, but you are welcome to download them. There's a download button there, and you can adjust them for sure. There's also on the background tab a conversation protocol document from a training that we did with the district leaders of how to use this and how to talk about it. Great. I'll go forward. So here's another one. In the meantime, what can we learn from peers who outperform us with similar funds? And so that was another thing. They can look around for their peer schools and be connected to them for professional development and to think about what's working and why is it working. This is another look. You'll be able to compare elementary schools. So this is New York City compared to the rest of the state, which is kind of faded in the background there. That's one other view. But this is prompting interesting questions in the city of New York. Higher spending on very small schools is not yielding value for their students. Small schools, excuse me, have been receiving a lot of protection in New York City. We just did a training in New York City, and they're really questioning this. Is this what we need to be doing right now for our students? Is the small school model working? And if not, what can we do? It's working in some places. How's it working there? What can we learn from them? So here it is, like they're spending nearly $36,000 per pupil on the school, more than what's spent on similar schools. It's really coming at the cost of these schools here. They can't invest the same amount in those schools. So what can they do? It's not, there's money in those schools. How can we leverage these leaders, the people who are in this building, the teachers, the counselors, everybody, in order to turn it into outcomes? Or do we need to look at different models? So do you guys think most principals know what quadrant they're in? They don't. I'll tell you, they have no idea. Most of them think that they're under-resourced and underperforming. They're shocked when they see themselves so far off on the right-hand side of those grids. It's an important and game changer in the conversation with them. Do you think most school teachers and staff know which quadrant they're in? And do you think that matters? I do. If they feel under-resourced, then our expectations feel too big. But if they understand that they've got more resources, and they see hopefulness in the peer schools that are doing great things for kids, I think it's important for them to see that in order to leverage that kind of internal human behavior, because schooling is made up of so many humans. It's all human interaction. How do we do that? So we just quickly came together with 4 SEAT actions. that could drive the use of data. Carol, I can't see the clock. How much time do we have left?
We didn't get a warning yet, so that's a good sign. We were
Okay.
supposed to be going back at 3:40, but we're not going back yet.
There's
Okay.
a countdown clock that says 3 minutes.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, it didn't pop up. Okay, thank
I'm not
you.
going to try not to go too fast, but it is in here. So one is a state agency could deliver a model budget agenda for workshops requiring the use of the spending data in annual budget meetings. Say, we really think that this is important. We really want you to use it in your annual meetings. A legislature could actually pass that as a law as part of what the public meeting should include. You could host a data day for your district leaders, and I'll explain that in a second. Include training on data and finance and administrator prep programs and state certification requirements. This is not common. Most of the financial training is around self-dealing. So we really encourage states to think about what their administrator prep programs include. And then be very intentional and celebrate learning from schools that are ROI superstars. Sorry, I cannot. Can't get rid of the bug. Okay, data day. What is a data day? We think this should catch on. Just pick a day. Okay, don't just find a day on the calendar out of the school year. Send it out to your school district leaders and say, on this day, we want you to look at data. Here's your data resources. Just go for it. It could be as subtle as that. Or leaders could do something a little bit more than that. And they could go and dang it, could put on the calendar, make sure you do that. But you might open the day with a virtual address by state leaders and bring everybody together and talk about the significance of data, what you hope people will learn from the data. They could examine data on attendance, on math, on reading, whatever are the priorities. It's just getting people to look at it. How do we get them to do that? And then you might even assemble cohorts for the activity. You might look at districts that are your CSI and TSI and say, we really want you to come together. Or if you have a set of CSI schools that you're struggling with for these reasons, come to this webinar. And leaders can then develop plans to address the needs during those days. We really think that if you just set aside a day, something might happen. I see the 1 minute warning, so I'm going to skip forward. We also have 4 actions districts could take. And so a state agency could even share this, like use this model agenda for your budget workshops. Think about a multi-year forecast, review your spending and outcomes data, get input from your principals. So I don't know, we love data. I hope you love data. It sounds like you all love data and you're trying to figure out how to love it more and to integrate it more, but I hope that this is helpful. If you have any questions about the SSOS tool, if you are curious about an alternate view, you're working very specifically on attendance or graduation requirements, grad rates, let us know and we can probably manipulate it pretty quickly for on a state-by-state basis. But that
Laura, there's an ask for whether you can paste the 4 recommendations in the chat. We're running out of time, but maybe when we get back to the main room, you could just.
I will do that, and the slides will be shared as well.
Yeah,
that works. That works. Thanks.
Yes,
Perfect.
okay.
Thanks so much, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Yep.
Thank you.